Yesterday we told you about a controversial protest in Sweden, a plan to burn the Quran in public. Well, they went ahead with it. Two men gathered outside this mosque in Stockholm. One of them ripped out pages from the Islamic holy book. He stomped on it. He wrapped it with bacon, which is taboo in Islam. And then he set it on fire. Around 200 people saw this entire episode unfold. Some of them shouted, "God is great" in Arabic. Others shouted, "Let it burn." The man behind this protest has been identified. It's a 30-year-old Iraqi refugee. He wants to ban the Quran in Sweden. But why burn it? Why desecrate a holy book in public? And that too on one of the holiest days in the Islamic calendar. What really was the point of this protest? If it was to offend, then well, congratulations. You've caught the attention of the whole world, the Islamic world, to be sure. Morocco has withdrawn its envoy to Sweden. Turkey is also up in arms. Look at what their foreign minister is saying, and I'm quoting, "It's unacceptable to allow such actions under the pretext of freedom of expression. To condone such acts is to be complicit." Talk about strange times. Even Turkey is making sense. The public opinion in Sweden is also against this protest. Listen into some of the reactions.
It's just part of that perpetual Islamophobia that just keeps growing and growing and growing, and I'm terrified to think where this is going to end.
We should not tolerate these things. We just have to say stop. It's not okay to humiliate other people.
Freedom of speech is very important, but I think burning a religious book, it's not freedom of speech. It's another thing. It's a provocation.
Well, there you have it. The Islamic world is unhappy, the people are unhappy, and even Sweden's allies are unhappy. So what then was the point of this protest? We told you the reasons yesterday. A Swedish court said there was no security threat from the protest, so they asked the police to give permission. And yes, there were no scuffles. No public disorder due to the Quran burning, not yet. But surely that's not the yardstick. What's legal is not always right. And Sweden should realize this fast, because such acts can have political consequences. We know that Sweden is hoping to become a NATO member, but two countries are holding them up. One is Hungary, the other is Turkey. It's one of the two Islamic countries in NATO, the other is Albania. And Turkey has plenty of problems with Sweden. Many Kurdish activists have found refuge in Sweden. They're wanted in Turkey, but in Sweden, they're political guests, which is one reason why Ankara is playing hardball with the NATO membership. Both countries were making some progress until January, but then things went south. Some political groups burnt a Quran near the Turkish embassy in Sweden. You can imagine how Turkey responded. They cancelled a visit by Sweden's defense minister. They also broke off the talks. So this is not happening for the first time, or even the second for that matter. Sweden has a record of burning Qurans. They say it's part of freedom of expression. But the question is, have they gone too far? Or was this done by design? You see, around 64% of Sweden's population supports NATO. That's a vast majority. But there's also a sizable population that does not. So could this have been their plot to derail Sweden's NATO ambitions? I ask because there is precedent. In the month of February, there was an anti-NATO protest planned in Sweden. The police ended up blocking it. But guess what was scheduled to be part of this protest? Burning of the Quran. That's what they planned. In that case, the Swedish police made the right call, but this time they failed. They filed a case against the Iraqi protester. He's been charged with agitation against an ethnic or national group. But will that be enough for Turkey? Remember, President Erdogan is fresh from elections. He's got the people's mandate behind him. Plus, he's not the lone dissenter anymore. Hungary is also holding up Sweden's membership. But none of this mattered for Stockholm. All they cared about was their false sense of righteousness. And let's be clear here, burning any religious book is not freedom of expression. It's a hate crime. It's criminal incitement of a community. And guess who agrees? The self-appointed professor of democracy, the United States of America. Listen to this.
We've said consistently that the burning of religious texts is disrespectful and hurtful, and what might be legal is certainly not necessarily appropriate.
Sweden needs to take a call here. If they want to join the NATO, they can't permit such acts. And even if NATO was not on the table, they can't permit such acts. Imagine if this happened in Asia or Africa, in India. Some nutcase decides to burn a religious book. What would be the Western response? They would label it Islamophobia, a sign of backsliding democracy. There would be a new chapter in their religious freedoms report. But when Sweden does it, it's legal but not appropriate. That's what their Prime Minister called it yesterday. Legal but not appropriate. Turkey has used much harsher words. Let's see if those words translate into action. France is burning again. The fatal shooting of a teenager has thrown the country into chaos. There have been clashes in many places. 40,000 police officers have been deployed across the country. President Emmanuel Macron has called the riots unjustifiable. But his intervention has not really helped. People are still angry. Just look at the pictures. Cars set on fire, shops ransacked, and cops attacked with fireworks. There were clashes too. This was the second night of unrest. More than 150 people have been arrested, but the crackdown is expected to aggravate tensions because the story is about the police and their high-handedness. What triggered the protest was the killing of a teenager. He was 17 years old. His name was Nahel M. He was shot dead in Nanterre this week. This is a western suburb of Paris. Nahel was in his car when two policemen confronted him. They shouted at him. One officer pulled out his gun and shot at the boy point blank. And if that wasn't bad enough, the police then tried to lie and cover up. Soon after the shooting, some reports emerged. They quoted anonymous police sources. They claimed that the teenager drove into the cops intentionally. And that's when they shot at him. But the pictures tell a very different story. The police's lie has been busted. The officer who fired the gun is in custody. He could face charges of voluntary manslaughter.
En l'état des investigations.
Based on the investigation and the elements we gathered, the court considers that the legal conditions for the use of a weapon have not been fulfilled. Consequently, at the end of his time in police custody, the police officer questioned for the usage of his weapon has been brought forward to two instructional magistrates as part of the opening of a legal investigation for voluntary homicide.
So action is being taken. But the protesters say it's not enough. The mother of the victim has called for a march. She posted a video on TikTok. Their lawyer wants to file an additional complaint. They want to accuse the police of false testimony. And prominent citizens of France are also speaking out, like footballer Kylian Mbappe and actor Omar Sy. They're demanding justice for Nahel. But what about the protesters? Why are they out in such large numbers, and what explains their sharp reaction? You see, this anger has been simmering for a while. The police in France have a reputation of high-handedness in suburban areas and especially against ethnic minorities. So there is deep mistrust, and French laws make it worse. In 2017, a law was passed. It authorized the use of deadly force. It made it easier for cops to shoot at moving vehicles, and some experts say French police are more brutal than all their European counterparts. They're also among the most heavily armed. France has been criticized by the European Court of Human Rights. In the last 6 years, France has been condemned at least 5 times. And this is over incidents of physical abuse by the police. So there is a clear pattern of behavior. But no Western power condemns France. or calls them out for human rights violations. And even after such public outrage, there is little to suggest that the attitude has changed. After President Macron's words of condemnation, the French police union spoke out. Do you know what they said? They attacked the French president. The union says Macron should not have condemned the cops. He should have waited for the investigation to end. In fact, let me quote from their statement. They say, like any citizen, we have the right to the presumption of innocence. So they're still in denial mode. Everyone can see what has happened, but the police remains defiant. And where does this leave President Macron? Well, in a bind yet again. Police reform is a contentious topic in France. In 2020, Macron tried to push a new security law. It led to nationwide protests. He wanted to adopt a tougher approach on law and order, but there was a public backlash. From the Yellow Vest protests to the outrage over pension reforms and now the riots over a police shooting, domestic unrest is now becoming a hallmark of Macron's presidency.